Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. The race to the White House is well and truly on. Sitting US President Donald Trump from the Republican Party will seek re-election in the November election. But who will take him on? Now that's an interesting question to which there is no easy answer yet. It appears to be a toss-up between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. So will it be Biden or Sanders? Who is ahead and who is not? And irrespective of who wins the November election, what will the trajectory of the India-US relations? Two guests will have all the answers so that you, the viewer, know what it takes to be on top of the news. Let me introduce them to you. Joining me in the studio is Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, who served as Secretary of Economic Relations in the Indian Foreign Ministry. Also joining me is Professor Sreeram Chaulia, Dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this broadcast. Appreciate it. Professor Chaulia, do you think Sanders' campaign has peaked early? Or you think Joe momentum, as some people are calling it, will indeed put Biden ahead or pass Sanders in the next few weeks?
Ramesh, I think Biden has this covered now. I think because the so-called moderate Democratic voters, especially the ones in the suburbs, have been thronging, and in fact they are voting in larger numbers than previous Democratic primaries. Right. So it shows that they believe that Sanders is, as he himself calls himself, a democratic socialist. They believe that in a capitalist society like America, he's going to be, unelectable as president. And so I think there is a push, but there's also a technical factor, Ramesh. Last time 2016, Bernie Sanders gave a very tough fight to Hillary Clinton in the primaries, because at that time, in the US system there are two. One are called caucuses, the other called primaries. And caucuses are like open spaces where just people gather physically, and with a show of hands or with a yes or no they vote. Primary is like a proper secret ballot where you go inside and you put it, you insert it into a slot. Last time Sanders did well in the caucuses, because that was like a more like a town hall, like an assembly kind of feeling, where there was that the far left that Sanders represented could gain momentum. This time the Democratic National Convention, the party establishment that organizes it, has done it in such a way, except 5 states, all others have primaries, which is like proper voting. So this time it looks like Sanders is not going to really last very long. I expect that as we move forward, even before we reach maybe 30-40 states, I think he will give in and he will announce that he's stepping out of the race. So in that sense, Biden has it covered. But then the bigger question is he electable in November against Trump? And in the context of the virus, it remains to be seen. But one thing is for sure, the Sanders pressure always remains, even though he doesn't win. The issues that he raises, the progressive causes and all those, he has forced Biden to also move a little bit to more left of center. Because Biden is a centrist candidate, he is seen as an establishment candidate. So, and he will need the Sanders voters on his side. The last time, Ramesh, what happened is 12% of people who voted for Bernie Sanders in the primaries actually voted for Trump, who's the other party in November in 2016, not for Hillary Clinton. So the question is, even if let's say Sanders concedes the race and he asks his faithful to transfer their votes to the only Democratic candidate, which is likely to be Biden, will it happen or not? And I'm sure Trump has his own strategy to try and exploit the divisions that have come out of the Democratic Party as a result of this arduous months-long brawl over the nomination.
Right. Professor Chaulia, how would you compare or contrast the poll planks of both rivals, the two rivals, Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden? For instance, Sanders, correct me if I'm wrong, is for a big government. He advocates the Medicare for all, more government spending on healthcare and less of private players and insurance companies in this field. Whereas Biden is a more moderate face. He wants to follow the middle path, so to speak. So how would you rate or compare their respective poll planks or agendas in the elections?
Yeah, Ramesh, on healthcare and education, these are the two big issues always. Yes, definitely Sanders is the more radical view, and he believes that the American system has been rigged to benefit big businesses, and that there must be severe constraints and checks upon the exploitation of middle and working classes by big businesses.
Right.
So on the other hand, Biden is going to be fishing for donors because he needs that as he moves forward to try and challenge Trump, because incumbents have a huge advantage with financing, and
True.
incumbents generally in the main presidential elections going from 1780s until 2016, more than 2/3 of the time incumbents have got re-elected in the US system. So that's almost 70% chances of Trump getting re-elected, and that's because they can mobilize larger set of resources and donors, and also, as Ambassador was mentioning, they don't face internal primaries in their own party. So the entire Republican Party base is galvanized and behind Trump. So although Trump's approval ratings of 42 to 46%, they've been more or less the same throughout this presidency, and they've not fallen significantly. So in that sense, I think he has an edge. But the contrast between Biden and Trump, I think, as I said, and Sanders has forced Biden to also adopt more, for example, on trade. You see, traditionally, the Democrats were seen as skeptical about trade, but over time they became more and more in favor of trade deals. But now they are forced to step back because Sanders has brought the labor unions, the working class, who demand more and more protectionism.
Right.
So in that sense, the same populism that Trump has on the right, a similar populism on the left with Sanders, and Biden is being forced to move away from free trade in this direction. On foreign policy also, Biden published an essay in Foreign Affairs, the latest edition, where he's saying, I don't believe in military interventions, and I'm going to end all the wars, I'm going to bring people back home, we need to focus on infrastructure. This sounds a lot like Trump or like Sanders. So in that sense, you don't see a kind of very sharp polarization on a lot of economic issues, but on cultural issues there will be, because Trump will take the anti-immigrant and use the race card very aggressively, while the Democrats don't. And Biden is talking about how we have to take along all the minorities together, and he's also hoping to get their votes. As you mentioned, the Hispanics are moving towards Biden, and so are African Americans. But so he's trying to assemble the same multi-sectoral coalition that Obama had,
Right.
and that's a strength and also vulnerability, because Biden is not Obama, he's not as fresh, he's got more baggage over time being in government for a longer time. And secondly, the Trump campaign is going to paint Biden as the second Hillary Clinton, the establishment liberal viewpoint, although he's trying to move to the left. So there's going to be a lot of positioning and repositioning. 6 months is a long time. I mean, now they're saying because the virus, suddenly Trump's approval rating has dipped by 2 or 3 percentage points. I would not give too much, because it's still 6-7 months to go, and in politics they say it's like a lifetime, so much can happen, and still I would say Trump is front runner. But Joe Biden, the sudden surge, despite making many gaffes, and despite not sounding very convincing or very authentic to the general public, it remains to be seen, because the ones who are voting in primaries, Ramesh, are like very, very hardcore party loyalists,
Right.
And the faithful. And it doesn't mean that this represents the general electorate. There are many who are sitting on the fence, many who will be looking at how the economy goes, how the corona response goes, and so on going forward. So it's early days, but Biden, I think, definitely is shaping up to challenge Trump.
Professor Chaulia, what would Biden foreign policy look like? And what is Sanders' worldview, if you can explain for the benefit of viewers who might not be familiar with these two personalities?
Well, first up, Sanders is quite radical. I mean, he's a socialist or / communist. And if he were to become president, which is a long shot, he would probably shut down all the US military bases worldwide and bring back all forces positioned worldwide, because he believes that it's like an empire,
Right.
that must be ended. So, so if Trump is isolationist, then you can imagine what a Sanders administration is going to look like, and he believes in, that, as I said, curtailing globalization and, controlling capitalism and all those things. So it's going to be based around the idea of social justice, and he believes that, all countries of the world should come together, and the working people should be liberated, and that sort of thing. So that in the US system, no matter how disenchanted people are with globalization, may not work, because, as I said, Trump brings both the class and the race elements to the table, while Sanders does not do race baiting at all, no, because he's like a convinced Marxist socialist type. So as far as Biden goes, Biden is basically reprising the Obama. In fact, the essay he wrote, he says Trump has hollowed out the US diplomacy, and we are going to bring back civilian side of US diplomacy. We're going to rebuild our fractured relations with all our allies and major partners. He mentions India specifically, as well as all the other treaty allies of the US, and says how we must all come together as democracies and counterbalance China and Russia. So in that sense, it's a very traditional liberal foreign policy where he prioritizes the role for coalitions and alliances, and where the multilateral strategy of the US and he also talks about institutions, about global treaties. Like he says, on day one of the Biden presidency, I'm going to re-sign the Paris Climate Accord, which Trump has quit, and likewise, many other things. So he's basically saying we will restore status quo ante that used to exist when I was vice president under Obama, and we will recreate that whole magic of a US-led world order. He says, we will be at the head of the table, and we'll again take everybody along. But my own feeling is that as the primaries progress and as he goes head-on with Trump in the future, he will be forced to move in a more populist direction, because Trump is, I think, the winds of populism are blowing strong. Either you are far left populist or a far right populist. I think that seems to be the median voter. The traditional theory in political science, the median voter is somewhere in the center. But in a highly polarized era where 50% of the American public is hardcore liberal and another 50% hardcore conservative, you may need to take actually extreme positions to win the election, right? So I have a feeling that Biden will not be able to sustain this liberal interventionist type of foreign policy in the future. So we'll have to wait and see. I think even if, let's say he wins, let's say Biden becomes president, anything is possible. I think he will have to hew to the public opinion, the currents which are more isolationist and less in favor of the US playing a big global leadership role.
And since I'm running out of time, one last question to both my guests, starting with you, Professor Chaulia. How worried or anxious might India be given the election, the state of elections, or the state of play in the US as we speak? And would you say that India would need to calibrate its responses going forward depending on who might end up the winner come November?
Yeah, I see we have a fairly bipartisan support in the American system. As you know, the strategic partnership has existed across Republican and Democratic presidencies. So to that extent, I think there's not a big risk, except if Bernie Sanders wins, which is unlikely, as we are saying. So whether it is Biden or Trump, I think we will look to take this strategic partnership forward. I think ideally speaking, a liberal internationalist like Joe Biden may be easier for us. In the sense, because he believes in this, coalition of democracies, counterbalancing China, and building large-scale, multilateral alliances and those kind of things, which Trump has totally neglected. And we often say Trump is transactionalist, while Biden may have a broader geostrategic or grand strategy, which Trump has lacked. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, we are not the voters, and we have to work with whoever wins. And in this case, I think all bets are off. It still looks like Trump is going to be the front runner as we go forward, despite the corona shock to his ratings. So I think in the long run, everything depends on the state of the US economy. And the final quarter, just before the voting, is going to be a clincher. So with all the supplementary measures that Trump has now announced for shoring up the recessionary trends and to prevent them from going forward, he may just scrape through. But either way, I think for India, we have to think about what to do if there is a Trump 2.0 or if Biden comes. If Biden comes back, it's like, as I said, some kind of a cushion we have, which we had with Obama. If Trump comes back, I think we have to do more Howdy Modis and more Namaste Trumps and many more such events, because that's how we can manage this transactional relationship and keep the strategic elements going.
Absolutely. Right. On that note, Ambassador Chakravarti and Professor Chaulia, thank you so much for joining me in the discussion. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.